There comes a time in every person's life when solitude finds them, either by choice or by circumstance. It is during these moments of isolation that the most profound lessons can be learned. Many people fear being alone, associating it with loneliness, abandonment, or failure. Yet, it is often in solitude that God works the most deeply within us. He desires to take us aside, away from distractions, noise, and the demands of life, to shape us into who we are meant to be. When you are alone, you are stripped of the noise that drowns out His voice. It is in these quiet moments that God speaks. His whispers, which are so often muffled by the chaos of daily life, can finally be heard. He speaks to you about your purpose, your heart, and the plans He has for you. Solitude is not a punishment but an invitation, a divine opportunity to connect with Him on a deeper level. Consider the lives of those in the Bible who were called to solitude before they stepped into their purpose. Moses spent 40 years in the desert before he became the leader of Israel. Joseph was isolated in prison before he became a ruler in Egypt. Even Jesus Himself spent 40 days in the wilderness before He began His ministry. God often uses seasons of solitude to prepare His people for something greater. He allows you to face yourself, to confront your fears, your weaknesses, and your doubts, so that you can emerge stronger, more faithful, and more aligned with His will. In solitude, you discover who you truly are. Without the influence of others, you see your strengths and weaknesses more clearly. You learn to rely on God instead of people, possessions, or circumstances. The world teaches us to fill our lives with constant activity, but God teaches us to rest, to wait, and to trust in His timing. It is in the quiet that He reminds us we are never truly alone because He is always with us. Being alone also teaches you to listen, not just to God but to your own soul. When you are surrounded by people, it is easy to suppress your emotions, to distract yourself from the questions and doubts that linger in the back of your mind. But in solitude, there is no one to hide behind. God uses this time to bring clarity, healing, and direction to your life. He reminds you that your worth is not determined by how many people surround you or validate you, but by His unchanging love for you. Solitude is also a time of preparation. Before God entrusts you with something big, He often pulls you aside to refine you. Just as gold is refined in fire, your time alone can be a refining process, burning away the impurities and revealing the beauty of who He created you to be. In this season, you might feel the weight of uncertainty or even pain, but trust that it is all part of His plan. God wants you to be alone so that you can become more dependent on Him. When you have no one else to turn to, you learn to lean on Him completely. You experience His provision, His peace, and His presence in ways you never could when surrounded by others. He becomes your rock, your refuge, and your source of strength. This deep reliance on Him prepares you for the challenges and blessings ahead. So, if you find yourself in a season of solitude, do not resist it. Embrace it. See it as a gift, a sacred time set apart for you and God. Use it to grow, to heal, and to draw closer to Him. Trust that He has not forgotten you or abandoned you. Instead, He is preparing you for something far greater than you can imagine. Remember, you are never truly alone, for the One who created you walks beside you every step of the way. In the stillness, there is strength. In the quiet, there is clarity. And in the solitude, there is God. Sometimes in life, we find ourselves walking a path that feels lonely. We might wonder why we're isolated, why relationships break, or why friends drift away. It can feel like punishment, but it's not. Being alone can be a divine plan, a period of preparation, growth, and discovery. God often uses solitude as a tool to bring us closer to Him and to shape us into the people we're meant to be. When you're alone, distractions fall away. The noise of the world quiets, and for the first time, you can hear your own thoughts and God's voice. It's in those moments of silence and solitude that God whispers to your heart. He reveals truths about your life, your purpose, and your identity. When surrounded by people, it's easy to get lost in their opinions, their approval, and their expectations. Solitude gives you the space to find who you are in God, not in the world. Being alone is not abandonment. It's alignment. God sometimes removes people from your life so you can focus on Him. He knows what relationships are toxic, which ones are holding you back, and which ones you're depending on more than Him. In solitude, He teaches you to rely on His strength and guidance. You learn to trust His plan, even when it doesn't make sense. In these seasons, God often reveals your hidden potential. Without the noise of external influences, you can uncover talents, passions, and callings that you never realized were there. Think of biblical figures like Moses, who spent years in the desert before leading Israel, or Jesus, who retreated to pray alone before major moments in his ministry. Their solitude was not a waste, it was preparation. God also uses these times to heal you. When you're alone, you have the time and space to process pain, reflect on past wounds, and allow God to mend your heart. Healing isn't always instant. It's a process, and solitude creates the environment for that transformation to take place. Solitude is also a test. Can you be content with God alone? Can you trust Him when there's no one else to lean on? This test isn't to punish you but to strengthen you. When you come out of it, your faith will be unshakable. You'll know that no matter what happens, God is enough. Remember, loneliness is different from being alone. Loneliness is a feeling of emptiness, but being alone with God fills you up. It's in those quiet moments that you discover He's been there all along, waiting for you to turn to Him. So, if you're in a season of solitude, don't fight it. Don't rush to fill the emptiness with temporary things or people who don't align with God's purpose for you. Instead, embrace it. Seek God, listen for His voice, and trust that He is preparing you for something greater. Being alone is not a punishment. It's a gift, a calling to grow closer to God, to discover your purpose, and to prepare for the next chapter of your life. Trust the process, because the one who's guiding you knows exactly where He's leading you. Sometimes, life leads us into seasons of solitude, moments when we feel isolated and wonder why certain relationships fade, why doors seem to close, or why the noise of the world feels so distant. These moments can feel heavy, even overwhelming, but they serve a greater purpose. Being alone is not a punishment, it's preparation. God often uses solitude to refine us, to strip away distractions, and to allow us to hear His voice more clearly. In the stillness, we can confront parts of ourselves that are buried beneath the busyness of life. It's in these quiet moments that God shapes us, reminding us that our worth does not depend on others' approval, accomplishments, or constant activity. Instead, our identity is rooted in Him. When we're surrounded by people and consumed by the world's demands, it's easy to lose focus on what truly matters. But in solitude, God teaches us to lean on Him. He reminds us that He is the source of our strength, our comfort, and our direction. He pulls us away from the crowd, not to isolate us but to draw us closer to Him. In this sacred space, He whispers truths that we might otherwise miss in the noise. Solitude is also a time of preparation. Many of the greatest figures in history experienced seasons of being alone before stepping into their purpose. Moses spent 40 years in the wilderness before God called him to lead His people. David was alone tending sheep before he became king. Even Jesus retreated to the wilderness to pray and fast before beginning His ministry. These moments weren't wasted. They were pivotal times of growth, reflection, and alignment with God's will. When you're alone, God may be protecting you from relationships or situations that aren't meant for you. He might be teaching you patience or building your character. He might be helping you heal from wounds that you've ignored for too long. Trust that He sees the bigger picture, even when it feels unclear to you. Embrace these moments of solitude as opportunities to grow deeper in your faith and understanding of yourself. Use this time to pray, to listen, and to trust in God's plan. Remember, you are never truly alone. God's presence is with you always, guiding you, comforting you, and preparing you for what's to come. The world may see being alone as something to avoid, but God uses it as a powerful tool for transformation. He sets you apart not to abandon you but to prepare you for something greater. So, if you find yourself in a season of solitude, take heart. Know that God is working behind the scenes, shaping you, refining you, and leading you toward His purpose for your life. Stay faithful and trust in His timing. The silence will not last forever, but the lessons you learn in it will remain with you always. There comes a point in every person's life when they feel a sense of isolation. It's as though the world has gone quiet, the noise of others fades away, and you're left with only your thoughts. While it might seem unsettling at first, this period of solitude is not a punishment but rather a divine opportunity, a sacred moment orchestrated by God Himself. To understand why God desires this for us, we need to look beyond the surface of our circumstances and see His purpose at work. Being alone is often misunderstood. Society tends to glorify constant connection, always being with people, staying busy, and being surrounded by voices. Yet, when you are constantly in the company of others, you often lose the ability to hear the one voice that truly matters, God's. In the stillness of solitude, God speaks. He whispers truths about your life, reveals insights you couldn't hear amid the chaos, and calls you into a deeper relationship with Him. Solitude is where God refines us. Think of the greatest figures in the Bible: Moses, Elijah, Jesus. They all had moments of being alone. Moses was called to the burning bush when he was by himself in the wilderness. Elijah heard God's still, small voice not in the storm but in the silence of a mountain cave. Jesus, too, withdrew to lonely places to pray, to prepare for His mission, and to seek strength. These were not accidental moments but intentional ones. God uses solitude to prepare you, to mold you into the person He created you to be, to strip away the distractions, and to align your heart with His will. When God places you in a season of aloneness, it's not to harm you but to heal you. Perhaps you've been carrying burdens too heavy for human hands to hold. Perhaps your heart is wounded from disappointments, rejections, or failures. In the quiet, God becomes your refuge. He reminds you that He is enough, that His grace is sufficient, and that you are not defined by your circumstances or what others think of you. Alone, you find that your worth is rooted in Him, not in your achievements, your relationships, or your social standing. God wants you to be alone so you can discover who you really are. In the noise of life, it's easy to adopt identities that aren't truly yours. You conform to what others expect, you strive to fit into molds that don't suit you, and you lose sight of the unique person God made you to be. But when you're alone, you're stripped of pretense. You come face to face with your true self. And in that moment, God begins His work. He shows you your strengths, confronts your weaknesses, and plants the seeds of transformation. It's also in solitude that God plants dreams and visions. When the voices of others fade, God can show you the plans He has for you. Plans to prosper you and not to harm you, to give you hope and a future. Maybe you've been too distracted to notice the passions He placed in your heart, or too consumed with fear to take the steps He's been nudging you toward. Solitude allows God to awaken those dreams, to give you clarity and courage, and to remind you that He is with you every step of the way. Being alone can feel like abandonment, but it is, in fact, divine alignment. God removes people from your life not because He wants to leave you desolate, but because He wants to make room for something greater. Sometimes He removes relationships that are toxic, habits that are destructive, or mindsets that are limiting. And while the process can be painful, it's necessary for your growth. He wants to bring the right people into your life at the right time, people who will uplift you, support you, and align with His purpose for you. Finally, solitude teaches you to depend on God. When there's no one else to turn to, when no one else understands, God becomes your anchor. He shows you that His love is constant, His presence is unwavering, and His power is limitless. You learn to trust Him in ways you never could when surrounded by people. And that trust becomes the foundation of your faith, the rock on which you can stand no matter what storms come your way.